Welcome, everyone. I'm Evan Rosenberg, publisher of the Pittsburgh Business Times. Thank you for joining us today as we bring you a discussion on business and race. The combination of COVID-19, an economic recession, and social unrest has created a series of challenges for our minority communities. I'm thrilled that so many of you have joined us for this dialogue with local leaders to outline the role businesses should play in response to social justice and equity. This webinar is made possible by the support of our generous sponsors. Our program is presented by Highmark Health, thanks to David Holmberg and Evan Frazier in helping to lead the way in our community. Our event sponsor is Koppers, and a big thank you to the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh Foundation. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome our moderator for today, Dr. Lonnie Haynes, Chief Diversity Officer at Highmark Health. Lonnie?
Thanks, Evan, and good afternoon, everyone. As Evan mentioned, this has been an unusual time in our history. I have coined it the trifecta, as he noted, the COVID-19 crisis coupled with an economic fallout that's unprecedented, and then the social unrest that stems from the murders of several Black people throughout the country by policemen. And so this trifecta has impacted the nation, but it's had an unusual impact here in Pittsburgh, given our historical context around race and economic opportunity in this space. So I'm really excited to have an esteemed panel here today. We really want to delve into their thoughts, experience, and perspectives around how business people, corporations, academia, nonprofit can respond to these challenges that we're facing here in Pittsburgh. And I think it's even more critical as we look at certain demographics. I've mentioned recently about the phenomena around, this is the first year there's more children of color in kindergarten in this country, which really sets the demographics for a future economics. And just a bit of more data just for the context of the conversation. African Americans and Black individuals in this country spend $1.2 trillion a year. That's their spending power. The Latino population, which is now the largest minority population in the country at 17%, their spending is $1.5 trillion a year. The Asian population, which is only 6% of the population, they spend $1.2 trillion. So that aggregate is phenomenal within itself. And we do know that by 2035, the Latino population will be 30% of the population in this country. So given the demographics, the spending power, it's critical that we understand from a business standpoint, not only that diversity and inclusion is the right thing to do, but there's a business case for it. And so as we go into this conversation, we'll use that as a backdrop as we listen to, again, our esteemed panelists, their thoughts and perspectives. I'll ask them to introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Tracy McCantis-Lewis. Tracy.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Lonnie. Good afternoon. I'm Tracy McCantis-Lewis. I am Deputy General Counsel and Director of Human Resources for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Tracy. Steve.
Hi, everyone. This is Steve Melnight. I'm the President and CEO at Duquesne Light, and I'm really happy to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Steve. David.
Good afternoon. David Motley, President of MCAPS. Really pleased to be able to join the conversation. Looking forward to participating.
Thanks, David. And Greg Spencer.
Thank you, Lonnie. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Greg Spencer. I'm the President and CEO of Randall Industries.
Thanks, Greg. So to start with the questions, and I think the questions I have for you are extremely important, but I'm really excited the fact that we have a pretty broad-based, diverse panel. CEO of a major utility company, a former CEO and entrepreneur, and a board member, and of course, Tracy is in the middle of a sports entertainment organization. So I think our audience will glean some important information from each of your perspectives. I'd really like to start off, as I mentioned, about this trifecta that we've all experienced, and would like to just get your personal take on what that's been like for you within your organization and you personally, and how you see how this has impacted our country, but specifically our community in your own lens. And I'm going to start again with Tracy, if you would kick us off.
Sure. I'll start with my perspective personally. After the George Floyd incident, which really, for a lot of Americans, brought to light some of the effects of African American oppression in the country, or discrimination. Coming to work that day after the weekend of protests, some of which were held in Pittsburgh, it was a very hard day for me to come to work. My personal feelings, the hurt that I was feeling, but the Pittsburgh Penguins organization gave a platform for me to speak as to what I was experiencing. And I think it gave an opportunity for my colleagues to truly understand what it means to be an African American in the city of Pittsburgh and in America. Everyone was very receptive to hear my thoughts, my feelings, my hurts, my pain, and wanted to know what can we do as an organization to make things better. So that definitely the Pittsburgh Penguins organization stepped up. I think it was also very important for us to talk about it as an organization because there were some incidents that happened at the protests here in Pittsburgh that happened right in front of PPG Paints Arena. CEO was here, our general counsel was here, they were here at the arena when some of those events took place. And they also gave their perspective and what they saw. They were able to speak on some things and bring some truth to some events that happened. And so, again, I think it was very important for everyone's perspective around those times to be expressed in an open forum at the organization.
And if you could, Tracy, it's interesting that you mentioned the fact that that did happen right in front of the arena. And of course, the visual still resonates with me. Can you speak to real quickly what the employees felt, or what was the conversation like?
So there were a number of employees who I think, a candid conversation from an African American, this may have been the first time that they heard some of the things that I said. I got emotional. And I think, again, it was the first time that maybe some individuals saw something like that. I got many private messages. I got phone calls, reaching out, people wanting to know how they can help, how they can be an ally, how they can bring more understanding to themselves, to their families, to their colleagues, to their children. I even had a colleague reached out, what type of book can I read to my toddler children? How can I give them understanding? So those were the types of conversations and outreach that I experienced.
Thank you. Steve, you're pretty new to the region, coming in from, I think, the Bay Area. And so I'd really like to hear your perspective and thought coming into a new city and in the midst of everything that's happened. What has been your experience and your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Lonnie. And I'll tell you, it's 2020, what a year. It was really interesting because I think that the way you described the trifecta is such an important element of what's happening societally right now, because March came and COVID was hitting. There's so much uncertainty of how are we going to work and operate, and for Duquesne Light, 1,000 of our 1,600 employees suddenly were working from home, and I wasn't having that kind of interaction with people. We weren't having the interaction with each other that we sort of counted on to support each other through challenging times and uncertainty, and help remind each other we're going to get through it. And as the economy started challenging and we saw those horrifying lines at the community food bank and the need for our community, that I think also rocked us. It rocked everyone with a sense of what's happening in our community and what's happening with our neighbors. And on top of all of that uncertainty and concern, to watch what was, I think, one of the most horrific videos anyone can see of the murder of George Floyd, it just, I think, struck everyone in a way that brought it home that it might not have done before. And I'm going to be candid, as a person who was not raised with the common experience that most Black Americans have dealt with every day, that video just brought into stark relief the horror of that situation. And I will tell you, what personally affected me was not so much that video, it was hearing from my friends or colleagues who are African American that that video didn't surprise them as much as it did everyone else. Yeah. The reality that that is not an exception, the reality that that is a part of an everyday experience of members of our communities, our friends, our neighbors, that I think was really hard. And as the protests, began, and as people justifiably sort of brought forward their concerns, their anger, their fears, within the company, I think one of our realizations was just our people are hurting right now. Our teammates are hurting, our community's hurting. We didn't have the vehicles that we had normally, the getting in front of people and talking to each other that we normally had. So we really started focusing on how do we support each other through what is a very painful experience and a painful reality, for both people for whom that video was a common experience and people for whom we're now facing the realization that there is something they didn't understand about the experience of our colleagues. And that was it was a really challenging weekend and a challenging time after, but one actually that I think helped bring us as a team together in a better way, and I hope as a community as well.
Thanks, Dave. David, your thoughts? You're on mute, David.
Building on something that Steve said, the notion that this was something that was a surprise to some, but was not a surprise, actually, I would almost say expected by others, is an interesting paradox that plays into a lot of what I'd like to share from a personal standpoint. And the fact that 3 events together came forward to make a lot of us, myself included, basically take a look really deeply inside, things that we were perhaps had come to just cope with and accept as part of the way that life is, that now we were questioning and challenging and potentially putting us in a place where tomorrow might be different than today. And I would say from a personal standpoint, the George Floyd tragedy, whether you want to call it a death, a tragedy, a murder, to me, even how you begin to verbalize that shows how differently people interpret that experience. It was very, very painful for me to have that event precede learning things about my family, my kids, friends of mine, and things that they had experienced, which I was not aware of, that quote unquote, they had just tolerated as part of being Black in America. And I would say that in that first 30 days, there was a lot of raw emotion around my family, around my friend set, around my business colleagues. And as Tracy said, there was a lot of, I would almost call it healing of us that came from the conversations that were had. But I would also say that there was also some gaps that were identified that were perhaps even stretched because some of the attempts at connecting were unsuccessful. Some of the outreach that occurred was not authentic. And I think it's really important as we try and look at where we go from here to really put our arms around kind of that full experience, some of which was positive, some of which wasn't, some of which is going to lead to action, other of it that was more of what I'd call the polished PR response to the events. And I think the jury is still out as to how much of a yield we're going to actually capture from this moment in history where we really do have the opportunity to potentially move the needle. And I think that the last thing I would say is that I learned a lot about myself and about the opportunity that I have to be relevant, to be more relevant, and hopefully a lot of other people have also learned that and are going to choose to lean in and exercise some of the privilege, some of the power and influence that we have, whether we are a majority or minority, whether we're Black or white, and try and be a part of the solution.
Thanks, David. And Greg, we'd really love to hear your perspective, especially given this is home for you, Washington, PA, Pittsburgh. You've spent a lot of time here of your professional career and have had the privilege to move around in the upper echelons of business, but also always with an ear to the ground. And so would really love to hear your thoughts and your responses to this.
Thank you. I'm actually enjoyed the comments from the various panelists. I shared in each one of them. And of course, particular respect to David. My plant has been shut down because of the pandemic, excuse me. Our biggest customer base is Taiwan and China. And so when they were hit with the virus, we went down. And then along came the United States being hit with the virus. And so I was kind of lonely because I didn't have employees to speak with. My church was shut down. My presiding elder, who I care very much for, was dying of cancer. And it made, like David, made me sit back and reflect a lot. And anyone who knows me know I have a beautiful, lovely wife who really helped me through all that stuff. But I also decided, and I do a lot of mentoring, and I also decided to reach out to young people that I mentor, and let them know that it's going to be okay, because most of them are young Black men who have come from troubled lives, and want them to make sure that they are inspired to continue on. And I understood that they would be fearful because many of them have been stopped by the police before. And so it could have been not only any of them, it could have also have been my son. So I said to myself that, what can I do? And I did much like Tracy. I mean, I wanted people to know that this man of privilege who did in fact get involved in a lot of major organizations was hurting and painful and felt that way through a lot of my career because it was very lonely. And so I reached out to where I had influence and wanted people to understand the struggle and pains that I have. And if they could feel my pain through our discussions, then I would have felt that I had made a difference. And I'm still continuing to work at that right now.
It's interesting you said that too. To your point, Greg, at Highmark, we hosted a town hall pretty immediately after the George Floyd incident. And I also provided a commentary to the business leaders, and I told of my experience. I shared that, when I go walking in the morning, which according to my wife is never enough. But when I do go walking in the morning, I usually take my employee badge, and in my badge, I have my driver's license, a credit card, and then my business card. And on the back of the business card, I have written, in case of emergency, contact Stephanie Watson-Haynes and her phone number. Because as I walk through various neighborhoods that I happen to have the privilege to live in, my concern is that when people see me, they only see a big Black guy walking through their neighborhood. They don't know that I work for Highmark. They don't know I'm a veteran. They don't know I have 5 college degrees. They just know that I'm a Black man walking through their neighborhood. And so even now in my 50s, I am still concerned about whether I make it home safely. So, I think it was, and it is important for us to share those authentic stories that this is what a lot of employees were feeling, probably couldn't articulate, and we as business leaders and as the leaders within our own respective organizations need to provide that forum for them to articulate that, and for their white counterparts to even understand what that feels like. And so I appreciate all of you providing that personal conversation. I'd like to know from each one of you, given that, what has been the response to the organizations that you work with or the boards that you sit on, given everything that's happened, and where do you see them, or how do you see them responding, not only for their employees of color, but for their employees in general? And I say that because even a lot of our employees at Highmark who are non-minority, they've asked, how can I help? What can I do? How can I support efforts to be much more equitable? So I'm curious to know, in the circles that you operate in, either as board directors or as leaders in organizations, what is the conversation that the leaders in your circle are having to their employees and to their partners and stakeholders? Tracy, we'll start with you again, if you would.
Sure. At the Penguins, I actually had a white colleague come to me. We did not have a diversity, equity, inclusion council. She recently came to the Pittsburgh Penguins organization from another sports team down south, where she was one of the founders of their DE&I council. And so we sat together and talked about what we could do with the Penguins organization. So we are in the process of doing that right now. We wanted to be very strategic in putting together diversity and inclusion training, a council, reaching out to some other organizations. Right before the pandemic came, I had sat down with Sabrina Saunders Mosby for the Pittsburgh Penguins to become a member organization of Vibrant Pittsburgh. We were not able to conclude that. It was literally 2 days before we had to shut down the arena. So we have since finalized that. So putting those things in place to give all of our staff an opportunity to have training, background in diversity, equity, and inclusion. We also partnered with RISE, which is a sports-focused program or initiative that uses sports to break down issues of bias, discrimination, privilege. They are focused at the high school level, collegiate level, and professional sports. So we've signed on with RISE, and we were introduced to RISE from the National Hockey League. So even looking at the National Hockey League and what they're looking at and making sure the clubs address diversity issues within each club. Hockey is a white male-dominated sport. No one can say that it isn't. And so that is something that we are looking at and addressing. In February of 2020, we had our first Black Hockey History Day. That was something that I wanted to use as the start to increase opportunities for African Americans, for other races to come and enjoy hockey in a safe space. So we are taking those initiatives and building upon those. So these are some of the things that the Penguins are setting up and looking at in response to what we're experiencing right now. We also have we're trying to put together a youth hockey program in the city. One of the things that we're looking at is there's no ice in the city that would be accessible to children that live in the city. So that's something that we're working on, again, to create more opportunities, more exposure for children that look like me to play hockey, to experience hockey, to become even elite, play hockey at the elite level, get scholarships in hockey. But we have to make the opportunity available. And so those are some of the projects and plans that the Pittsburgh Penguins are working on to make sure that we have these opportunities for staff internally, again, to get training, and then also working in the community to make sure that we are accessible and available for people to experience hockey and the privileges and benefits that come along with it.
Thanks, Tracy. Steve, and I asked for your response, and I also think it's unique that Duquesne Light, as a utility, touches everyone's life, irrespective of race, class, gender, zip code. The work that you do touches all of the citizens in the city. So I'm curious, not only from an internal standpoint for employees, but what are your thoughts as you think of the consumers that you serve in that same space?
Yeah, that's, Lonnie, it's one of the things I love about our industry. We serve everyone, and we serve this entire community. And frankly, as a business, we won't succeed unless our community succeeds. And here we find ourselves with our community just struggling so much. And candidly, just as Pittsburgh doesn't have always the greatest history of equity and full inclusion in our community, Duquesne Light also doesn't even have the best history to lean back on as a company of full equity and inclusion. So we have been making some significant strides there. It was, I will tell you, when the board hired me, it was an important issue for the board that the CEO was not just willing to stand up and lead on diversity and inclusion, but recognize the real value to our company and our community. And that's something that I've just been trained in throughout my time in the electric utility industry, that there is a very strong business case for diversity and inclusion. It's not just because it's the right thing to do, it's because it leads to better business outcomes. So we had been working a lot on that. We'd hired our first chief diversity officer. We diversified our executive team and brought in different perspectives. We actually launched right around the time the pandemic started. We did our virtual launch of our first business employee resource group, which was for women at Duquesne Light. And we're making great strides, but candidly, like, this was an opportunity for us to really put a foot on the accelerator, and to recognize that if we didn't use this as an opportunity to drive change in our organization, that we truly were blind to why it was so needed. And that was hard. I mean, in the very beginning, what do you do? What do you do in a situation that feels so unsolvable, that feels so big? And I think the first thing we did is we just opened a conversation, and we just started a very open, transparent dialogue where, I got to tell the team, this dialogue makes me nervous because I'm worried I might say the wrong thing. And, there's lots of wrong words to say, and I struggle always to find the right one. But together, we can get through that uncomfort and that discomfort in this conversation and have a kind of conversation we haven't had before. And we got a lot of feedback that town hall that we did was unlike any conversation we'd had before. Did we come up with solutions? Absolutely not. Did we understand each other better at the end of it? Absolutely. We also started doing a lot of outreach into the community. Vibrant Pittsburgh, a great organization. We've been partnered with them before, but really looked at now the opportunity to deepen that engagement. And as a company that not only serves everyone here, including businesses and minority-owned businesses in this community, but also spends a lot of money in our service territory, we recognized there's more we can do on supplier diversity, on supporting minority-owned and African-American-owned businesses in our community, and how we help our customers through it. So those are the conversations we're having now, because statements are great to make, but I think we also realize we've got to take some significant actions, and we're going to be thoughtful about that, because we want to make sure we're having the right impact. But we're continuing that push right now.
Great. David, you sit at an unusual, or well, let me say this, a very interesting intersection of banking, finance, equity, but also at the level of board directorship. And so I'd be curious to know what those conversations are like around that, and what are your thoughts and perspectives as you share recommendations to financial organizations and even funds that have maybe small in numbers of employees, but have a lot of influence in the financial community. I'd like to hear your thoughts about that from a financial perspective.
It is an interesting vantage point, in serving on a couple public company boards, some private company boards, also having the privilege of working with the African American Directors Forum, which gives us a national footprint to talk to Fortune 100 company executives from across the country as they were thinking through how to respond to this unique period in time. I was trying to figure out how to distill all those conversations, and there have been quite a few of them the last 4 or 5 months, into something that I can efficiently convey. And what strikes me is that they kind of fall into 4 buckets of interest. And Steve touched on one, and that is the conversation. People getting ready to have the conversation. The second is the activities that companies are advancing, the initiatives towards trying to see if they can't move the needle. And to me, that also speaks to almost what I would call the maturity level of a company, starting with the conversations, moving into the activities. But the companies that I'm involved with that are, I would say, the most mature, the furthest to the right on that curve, are companies that have moved into the realm of looking at and measuring results, putting metrics behind the conversations and the activities. And the most mature companies are taking it to the level of holding people accountable. And so if you look at that continuum from let's just talk about it, best effort is okay, which is what we've had more than a decade or two of in the realm of diversity and inclusion, to saying that this is real, this is like safety, this is like quality, this is like an environment. We are going to have time-bounded metrics, and we're going to hold people accountable. The most mature companies are really beginning to put their arms around that and saying, hey, why is it that we've invested this much time, this much resource, put this kind of organizational structure behind diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what we have to show for it pales in comparison to the incredible progress that we've made in areas where the problems seem just as intractable. I started out in chemical engineering, a chemical plant back in 1978. And the idea that you went into that environment and understood the risk. You may not come out with all your digits. You might be exposed to a toxic release. It was just part of working in that environment. If you worked in the metal fabricating industry, you walked around the plant. I remember my brother making a decision to leave a job that he had worked for about 12 months because he began to notice how many of the people that had been there for decades did not have all 10 fingers. Some people had lost hands, and they were still working in the plant and understood that was just the risk of going in. Today, those kind of environments just aren't part of our reality. People got really serious about safety and said, no, it's not acceptable. People got real serious about quality. Now we measure it in parts per million. Who would have thought? Diversity, equity, inclusion, I think we're still so far away from looking at this strategic imperative, and particularly when it comes to the racial equity part of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and looking at it the same way. And so I think there's a huge opportunity, and those companies that I'm talking to who are really serious about this are saying, one, with respect to the conversation, Steve, you said something really powerful, which I would commend you on, and that is to be vulnerable and understand that you might make a mistake or two or three, but the topic is so important that you can't not weigh in. Companies are looking at that conversation saying, hey, we need help getting ready for our executives to be able to lean into the conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, the conversations on race, and help them be prepared to have a productive, effective, efficient conversation on this topic, because it's important to where we want to take the company, all the way to the other end of companies who are looking at how do I map accountability? How do I truly take my leadership team and say, hey, this is not something that's important to me. This is something that's going to be important to you because it's part of your job. This is how you will be rewarded. This is how you will extend your employment here, is by delivering results on this critical topic that's been put in front of us yet again as a company, as a community, as a country.
I appreciate that, David. I think it's interesting that you mentioned that maturity level. In the D&I space, there is the slogan, what gets measured gets done. And so to your point, if we're not measuring the maturity of a D&I strategy within an organization, then we don't know where we are. We don't know what that journey looks like. And so it is critical that, you know, as you do or launch diversity programs, diversity strategies, that there are measurements. One, so that you understand the journey. Two, so that you understand how to incentivize, because to your point, people respond to how they're incentivized. And if diversity and inclusion is not incentivized within an organization, then its priorities at the bottom. Because we incentivize for sales, we do it for operations, we do it for supply chain methodology, we do it for finance, but most organizations will not do it for D&I. So I appreciate your comments on that.
I will leave you with one thought too, because there's a weightiness to this topic. But I've also talked to organizations that have also shared that some of the most enjoyable conversations that have been had have happened as a result of making it okay to have this conversation. We're now at a point in time where our personal lives and professional lives have collided. There's going to be some consequence out of that that perhaps brings some burden, some pain, but there's also going to be just a lot of more authentic, real, deep relationships created. And there's a huge positive to that too. And I would just encourage people to not look at this as just another heavy lift. But I know that there have been a couple of conversations that I've had with people that I've known for a long time that have gone places that they never went before, that have led to my now having a much deeper connection to those people. And so it's not all work. There's some fun in this as well.
Yeah. And Greg, that sort of stems back to what you mentioned earlier about the mentoring piece. And as you respond to the initial part of the question, I'd also like for you to segue into the difference between mentoring and sponsoring, because I know you do a lot of it. You've again been in the corporate space, you're now the entrepreneur, but you're also part of a lot of nonprofits and you do a lot of mentoring and sponsoring. As David was just alluding to and Tracy mentioned earlier, and when we talk about diverse talent and how do we keep diverse talent in this region, I think the sponsorship and mentorship of diverse talent is critical because we know from the data that's why a lot of people leave. It's one thing that they don't see themselves in certain organizations, but it's even more important that they don't have individuals who help mentor them and sponsor them. So I'd like for you, if you would, first respond to the initial question, but also differentiate, if you will, in your mind, mentoring versus sponsoring and why that's important when it comes to diverse talent in this region.
Thank you. So I'm someone that grew up in Little Washington, Pennsylvania. Went to HBCU, dropped out when the service came home, and started in a warehouse at U.S. Steel. Today, thinking that I am on the board of one of the largest healthcare organizations in the United States with 85,000 employees is mind-boggling. The fact that I chair the Poise Foundation is interesting as well, and the Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, each organization at a different level of maturity when we talk about issues around diversity and inclusion. And so from being at a board, it's important to make sure issues stay up on the table and make sure that things continue forward as they should. So I want to segue into the comment because I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I've always felt that I have been called to be a mentor. And I think sometimes people ask about your purpose. My purpose, I believe, is to carry myself so that other people like me have an opportunity to have a mission completed in wherever they want to go. And so that goes into parts, right? On the mentor, it's fundamentally being there to talk through issues and being there to help advance issues and challenge them in where they want to go and make sure they're able to get there. But a sponsorship is someone that talks about, instead of to, talks about the mentee, to be there for them and help them understand that there's this talent here in this region that unfortunately people don't see. And one of the things that I like about the Tally program is that every person in the program gets a sponsor, and that person also serves as a mentor to help them through. And so the more we do that, each one of us who are on this call right now has the opportunity to mentor and sponsor a young African-American male or female to realize their full potential. And I found that that's been the most gratifying part of what I do every day.
Just a quick plug, Greg mentioned Tally, that's the Advanced Leadership Initiative, which is one of a kind in the nation, really founded and led by Evan Frazier at Highmark, and has partnered with UPMC, PNC Bank, EQT, and a host of other corporations throughout the region. So I encourage the audience to look up the Advanced Leadership Initiative. Just Google it, and to Greg's point, they're doing phenomenal work here. We're really tight on time, about to wind up, but I'd ask all of you if you would share briefly for the audience your recommendations for them as corporate leaders, business leaders, entrepreneurs, individuals who have any influence in their communities, how we go forward in building a better business community that's much more inclusive. What are 1 and 2 steps that you'd ask for them to consider or do as we move forward? And we're gonna start with you this time, Greg.
I think that to start the communication and the discussion, and I recognize it's difficult sometimes or uncomfortable to talk about race, but we have to have that understanding and discussion so that we can better understand ourselves and our motivations where we want to go. So I'm an advocate of sitting down, having a discussion with someone unlike yourself, and have a discussion about where we need to go as a community.
David?
I would say that maybe bringing out the athlete in me, frustrated athlete that I am, I would say go big or go home. I would say that this is an opportunity for people to take a look at the opportunity of accessing that full talent pool, taking advantage of the fact that it's not a social imperative. It's not just a social imperative, but it is a business imperative. And to really capture all of the top line and bottom line opportunity, that putting in place a real program around diversity, equity, and inclusion that is time bound, that does in fact translate into accountability for your leadership team. And if you can't do it with the environment and the context that we have right now in this moment, you're never going to get it done. So seize the moment and make it happen.
Thanks, David. Steve?
Maybe to build on what I think David just said, because I totally agree and I love that analogy. I mean, I think we have to recognize that while I think the conversation around social justice has changed post George Floyd, and we are having those deeper conversations, at the same time, those other 2 pandemic and economic turmoil that we talked about are actually causing generally steps backwards, and disproportionately so, in terms of healthcare outcomes, educational outcomes, and other things. And as a business, and as the business community, we have to look at this and say, do we want a situation where there's more wage growth and more entrepreneurs and more people starting businesses and more people there as customers and more people in our community helping to grow this community, create new workforce of our future? It is time for us to go big on making real changes. And the single biggest opportunity is, frankly, the lack of equity across all of our community, but particularly in the African American community. And I think we've got to start tackling that directly. We need a future workforce. I need new businesses to be created for my company to grow and thrive. And it will be hindered unless there is more equity across all parts of our community. So I think it's time for us to start to go big and really tackle these issues and challenges. And as a business community, step up and recognize that we can make tremendous change in this community if we harness the power of our purchasing, our sales, our workforce development, and how we show up in the community.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Tracy?
As Steve said, and as David said, I agree, go big or go home. This is our opportunity to seize the moment. But I think we also have to make sure that we're being authentic in that we're not just doing it because this is the time to do it, this is the day, and we can check that off. It has to be authentic. We have to make opportunities for authentic conversations. We have to have safe spaces for those conversations. And we have to make sure we're doing it in a timely manner, but also not rushing it. We have to make sure that everyone understands that it may take some time for this to come because it needs to be lasting. And I think about, on our industry, the sports industry, there's many opportunities for us to bring in diversity and inclusion, but we also have to listen to the people that we're trying to serve and who we're bringing in. So going out into the community, we shouldn't go out with all the answers, but we need to listen and understand, what is it that you need from us? What is it that you want? So again, listening both ways. not thinking that we have all the answers, being authentic, being genuine, and having some patience to put those things in place so that they can be lasting.
Thanks, Tracy. David, I think you started a new tagline for us: "Be big or go home." And I totally agree. I think the tag "Carpe Diem," seize the day, is important for this, because what's happened, this is the perfect catalyst for us to, have change in this region. Many of our participants, I'm sure, have read the paper that came out last year around the Pittsburgh report on equity and gender equity and race in this region. And of course, the city is at the bottom of almost every area: education, health, employment, environment. And so it is, as Steve noted, it is incumbent upon the business community and those who have access and opportunities to, put a stake in the ground and make that decision to do something that benefits the business and the community as a whole. So I really want to thank those individuals and the audience for joining us on this critical topic. I really also want to thank our esteemed panel who took their time, provided their expertise and perspective with us this afternoon. And we hope the conversation continues, because nothing's going to happen without the conversation. As Tracy noted, it's got to be authentic, and there's got to be a deliberate strategy behind it. So again, thank you everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in the community when we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evan?
Thanks, Lonnie. You did a terrific job of moderating. We appreciate your leadership. To our esteemed panel, Tracy, Steve, David, and Greg, thanks for your leadership as well. We can't do this without the support of our sponsors. Thanks again to Highmark Health, Coppers, and the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh Foundation. And of course, thanks to all of you who joined us. We'll continue this dialogue in the Pittsburgh Business Times. Keep reading, look for more coverage, be well, and be safe. Take care.